Hi everybody, and welcome to one of our instructional design webinars at Quinnipiac University. It is Thursday, April 5th, 7 o'clock at night, and tonight we have a former student, a graduate of ours, Joanne Jagodowski, who will be talking to us about graphic design principles for instructional designers. So thank you so much for joining us, Joanne, and I am going to turn things over to you.
Okay. Can everybody see? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this presentation. So I wanted to present graphic design essentials for instructional designers. Some of the things that I noticed when I was going through the program that I was very glad that I had some background in. So just a little bit about me. I am an associate professor at Manchester Community College. I'm also chair of the Art and Design and Humanities Department. I do have an associate's degree in graphic design and a bachelor's of science in elementary education, and now the master's in instructional design. And I was really happy to get to be at Quinnipiac and get that master's degree because it really helped me to weave a lot of technology into the pedagogy of my design courses and kind of fired me up about teaching again. So it's been a really great year since I've graduated. So the overview of topics for today, I wanted to talk about a couple of design principles, two of the most important ones actually. So unity, which is the visual agreement of all elements in a composition, and then also emphasis, how to create points of focus to establish a visual hierarchy in the designs. So these principles are guidelines to follow to create visual organization and structure of your learning materials. Unity, it is one of the most important design principles. It is used to make all aspects of a composition appear to belong together by creating clear visual relationships between all elements. And then emphasis creates points of focus to establish a visual hierarchy in your design. It really helps your viewers to understand where to start and then how to continue and flow through your designs for that. I'm also going to talk about two different elements of designs. One is typography, and that's the style and appearance of your printed text and what type of text to use for what types of documents. And then also color schemes, which can be used to get attention, to organize content, to create focal points and emphasize elements, and sometimes even evoke emotion, and really to help your designs become aesthetically pleasing as well. So the first thing is unity. So unity creates a sense of harmony and wholeness by using similar elements within the design and placing them in a way that brings them all together. So ways to create unity is through proximity, repetition, and continuation. So I found a little graphic on Shutterstock that I really like, the dogs here. And this dog photograph actually shows all three. The dogs are all lined up in a row. They're close together, so they have proximity. They are all dogs, so they have repetition. And then there's a flow of continuation as well through these. We look from the left dog all the way through to the right side dog. So it's a great little photograph to kind of introduce the point. So unity by proximity, this is, again, is a way of achieving unity in a design by the segmentations of elements into clusters. I'm sorry. It's the first way to create unity is with that proximity. So I found some infographics actually to kind of talk through a little bit as I'm talking about these points for this. So when we use proximity, we can create unity by placing elements close together in these segments. The professional infographic is very effective in creating clusters of information. The title text is grouped together at the top, and it gets your attention. It's unified there. And then information is also presented in clusters or segments around that central icon over here. That white space in between really helps to focus the proximity. The text goes with these icons as you read through and you go around. And then the secondary information, and then the proximity of the contact information and the creators of the graphic right here. So it does a nice job of creating that unity all the way through that piece. Unity by repetition simply means the repetition of elements of the design that create harmony. So consistent use of fonts and colors and shapes create a cohesive whole, which can have a positive impact on learning. It's also important to keep the style consistent when using visuals like charts and graphs and illustrations. Repetition does not have to be boring, and I think this infographic is a great example of that. So we see a lot of repetition of color, first off, the color palette. So lots of repetition of the orange in different saturation levels. We have a lot of repetition of the font choices. So there's probably just 2 different fonts. They're using some font styles, but we definitely have these patterns that we recognize all the way through. The information on the left side, it's definitely in a pattern of repetition. So we've got a number with some text, a number with some text, and it really helps to keep this section unified. We've got the same symbols repeated over here in the bar graph, the same colors that are used as well. And then they introduce, and they use the rest of the colors down over here as well. So again, repetition does not need to be boring. You can bring in a lot of repetition through variations of color, the variations of the elements, the variations of the icon. But when we see this, we really see the whole infographic together. Another way to create unity is by continuation. So continuation simply means the alignment of and movement of your eye through a piece. So we guide the learner through the design in the order that we want them to see. So in this infographic, the designer used large gears to get your attention up here at the top and in the solid gear over here. And so that creates a focal point, and then we kind of start flowing through with the gears all the way through. And as we're flowing through, we've got the icons right over here. We've got the text that we read as well. So again, a really nice flow of alignment through the pieces. So when you're thinking about setting up your documentation, you can think of some letters and some numbers that actually help with continuation. So the letter S is a common path of continuation, which is pretty close to this. The letter Z, circles, spirals, all in even number 2s. These are all ways that we can create that line of continuation through. And so if you open up a magazine, you'll probably come across some ads where they have their headline at the top, they take you through some content or a picture, and then at the lower right corner, they end with the logo or the company web information. So very, very thoughtful with that line of continuation. And again, it helps the viewer flow through your piece in the order that you wanted them to go. So the next way that, next principle of design actually that you can use is emphasis. So emphasis is a way to create visual harmony through your design. And these points of focus or focal points will create a roadmap to guide your learner through the content. So that visual hierarchy throughout the design that does guide. So you have a focal point that grabs their attention, and then you have bullet points for that your headlines, subheads, all of that really helps to create emphasis throughout your piece and guide your viewer. So we have ways to create emphasis, which are contrast and placement. And again, the graphic of the dog, the photograph of the dogs shows both actually. So we really have a focal point of that Newfie dog. He is standing out. He is so much bigger than all the other dogs. So he's contrast in size. He's very dark, so he stands out in contrast of color. And then also he is in place, centrally placed in between the dogs. And so he is also that focal point due to placement for that. All right, so emphasis by contrast simply means any element that differs by shape, size, or color will stand out from the rest of the content there. One of the strongest ways to create contrast is through black and white. So black and white gives you the strongest value of contrast. And in this infographic, they actually use a black band, and they have the white reverse type on top to really create that strong focal point, that emphasis at the top, the title of that infographic. It was also a smart design move to employ the bands because they have that busyness of that background image all behind that. So these bands help to block that out and to create that contrast. And we also have color right over here that's providing contrast for the white text right over there. And it is also helping to create focal points of these items in these segments right here. So we've got our first focal point, and then we go down into the second set, the third set, the fourth set, all the way through this infographic. So they're doing a really good job with that color contrast, again, with the darker blue. You have to be very careful when you have, you're applying color on top of color. You do want to remember to have that contrast stand out so that it will actually be visible and it won't cause your reader any stress trying to read that as well for that. Okay, so this is another example of good emphasis by contrast. So you can use color to actually create contrast. Complementary colors, which are colors that are opposite each other on a color wheel, they'll create the strongest color contrast. But you do have to be careful. You don't want to use both colors in full saturations. So in this one, we've got colors of a blue, green, and a red. So we've got complementary colors, but they're not fully saturated. If you do use full saturated colors that are complementary, you're going to get some shimmery vibration edges around the edges of where the colors meet, and that really will cause some distress in your viewer if they're trying to be able to read that or to view that. So don't use that full saturations, and again, you can see that in this infographic here. So it's very effective. So we've got a color contrast. That 8 really stands out again, that white standing out. We've got the black contrast here to create that focal point. And then we continue with that reddish color, that saturation of red that's lower. So now we have focal points of a 1, of a 2, of a 3, and a 4. And then we also have some focal points of the images on the other side that do relate to the graphics. So again, good color contrast to create the focal points here. The next way to create emphasis is by placement. So when an element is placed either at the top of the design or in the center of the design, it's going to create a strong point of focus. So if you think of like the Target logo, everything is focused centrally on that logo. And this ADDIE model, this infographic, actually does the same type of an effect, or creates the same type of an effect. So we have this central focal point right over here. And we really view and we look into this area first. It's the largest thing, so there is some contrast, but that central placement really helps to hone that viewer's attention right to the center, the title of that. And then it just goes from the outside of that, where we read, and then to the edges all the way around for that. So we've got that kind of a bullseye effect for that. And then emphasis by placement can be fun as well. So we've got a great use of a graphic right here with that light shining down, giving it that spotlight effect. So we certainly will look at that top area, this infographic. This one was very long actually, but we really, this stands out because that light's shining down, it's highlighting it. The red background really helps that white text pop. And then they continue using the contrasting color bands, black and white, or red against, or red with the white text against it as well, all the way through this infographic. So creating that strong emphasis by placement, that focal point right there. So going into the elements now of what you can use actually as parts of your design. So typography is how we convey our information to our viewers, our learners, so it's very important. So there are some terms that go with typography that are important to know. And one of them is typeface. And first off, let me go back. Typography is actually the term designers use to refer to the styles and appearance of printed text. And then we have typefaces or font families, and those are the alphabets designed so that all the letters and some symbols have similar features. So example, Times New Roman or Arial, so that's a typeface or font family. The font is actually the specific style of a typeface. So example would be bold, or Times New Roman bold, so that's the font. Italic would be the font for that. And then we have two different types of fonts as well. We have serifs. So those typefaces have small lines or elements that tail from the edges of the letters. This is an example of Marta of the text right here. So we've got these little appendages here on the tops and the bottom of the strokes. And serifs were actually incorporated into type to help the reader flow. When they're reading, it helps the eye flow from one letter to another letter, almost like cursive when you think about the connecting of the letters. So opposite of serif would be sans serif. So that's any typeface that does not have any decorative elements at the end of the letter strokes. So in Canvas, they don't have Arial, so they have Arial as a font. And so there are no appendages on these letters. There's no additional strokes. So there's reasons and places that you use both of those types of fonts. And we'll go into that a little bit. So when you are using your type, there are type guidelines that you do need to follow. So you want to limit to 2 different font families. Just because there's a lot of fonts out there to choose from doesn't mean that all of them should be appearing into your documents. So really, if you can limit yourself to 2 different font families, and then you can use the styles in the font families to differentiate and create your headings and your subheadings. You want to use those styles again to establish the hierarchy. So you might have a heading that is in a bold font that's set at 20 point size, and then maybe your subhead is in a bold font but at 15 point size. And then you can also use the other iterations of the fonts, like the italics, to again create more subheads through that. You always do want to choose readability over aesthetics, and there are a lot of decorative fonts that you can use sparingly. So decorative fonts work really well for headlines, to get somebody's attention, to create that focal point, but don't use them in body copy to text for that reading, because you really want to make sure that your content is easily readable, and making sure again that they can see that and they have that the readability. You do want to know your audience as well. So mature learners, you want to use elegant fonts and a smaller font size. So if your audience again is they're college age or older, you're going to use the smaller font sizes. You don't need the large font sizes like you would do if you have younger learners. So for younger learners, you can get away with more playful fonts, though they still need to be readable. And you do need to have a larger font size for them. So if you think about children's books, for instance, their fonts are set much larger, and it has what we call a childlike appearance to them. So really look at your documents and look at the font choices that you're making, and make sure that they're very reflective of your audience. And then the way the fonts are set as well, the point size, making sure that that is reflective of your audience. So one of the biggest debates that's been out is to serif or to not serif. And about 10 years ago, we used serif fonts for everything. Serif fonts really do have an ease of readability. So your books, a lot of your books that are printed, magazines that are printed, they actually do use those serif fonts. Textbooks that have a lot of copy in them will use a serif font to make the flow easier for the reader. And so the studies that were done for that, they figured if serif fonts work really good for printed, then they're going to work just as well for online viewing. And studies actually proved that wrong. So sans serif fonts are actually much better for readability on the web. So if you're designing any graphics or any images and text that need to go online, you are actually going to want to use those sans serif fonts. So this is actually a really fun infographic that will open up, and I will provide this PDF to Kristen so you can access all of these links as well. But it was very well designed for this. So it's a really good article on serif, the final battle, and I love what they've done with the letters. They've made them superheroes in the battle for that. But it really does have good information. So if you're ever in doubt, you can go ahead and look at something like this. They're telling you that the dots per inches as well, the quality of your text, and all the way through for this, and the classifications. They talk about the letter strokes. So this is almost like a little crash course in typography, and it really will help you to choose your fonts appropriately when you are setting up your documents. So close out of that. All right. Next slide. So there are a lot of type websites that I use that are very helpful when I'm creating some documentation. So one of them is Canva, and Canva actually is such a great site. They have so many great resources for designers, instructional designers, for educators out there. So this font pairing guide from Canva actually is a great article. It does talk about typography. So again, it's a little crash course into typography. But they also talk about how to pair fonts together, when to use decorative fonts. So they talk about the anatomy of the typography. This is our students who take our typography courses. They need to know all of these here, every term, every terminology, and it goes over what we've talked about a little bit with the serif and sans serifs. And they also have some suggestions for pairing fonts. And if you look at these examples, you really get a sense of who these were created for, what their audience was in mind by these fonts that they've chosen. So fonts really do have personalities, and they're picking it up with the titles right over here. So it's a really great resource. One of the things that is a drawback for this is they don't have the ability to download the fonts, and so there's another great site out there that I use a lot, which is Font Pair Company. So let's go there. So I use this a lot because they break it down. They have hundreds of fonts that are available. So if you're looking for a sans serif and a serif combination, so you're doing some printed documentation, sans serifs are great for headlines, and then again, the serif, if it's printed, is great for printed text. So you can select these combinations, and they'll show you. You can actually, they'll have the heading set, and then they will also have the body copy set in the two fonts. But what's great about this is you can download the fonts. So they are free. This is a safe site to get a lot of different font combinations from. I do use them, and again, you get a quick sense of the audience and who this is going to appeal to with this. So I'm looking at Cabin and Old Standard here, and this looks and reminds me of almost like a children's storybook. So it would be great for early readers because we've got the serifs that are going to help that students go through. Would they also let you type in your own text so you can actually see what your text will look like in the font styles before you download them? And they just have so many different combinations. And just, it's been a great resource for me and for my design students as well. And they even have display. So again, we've got more of our decorative fonts that you're going to use very sparingly to call attention, to lead someone into your design or your poster or your infographic. And then they have some nice matches. When they were matching the fonts, they paid a lot of attention to the shapes of the A's, the shapes of the E's, G's between the text. And then they also looked very carefully at the weight that the fonts have. So you can see that this, they're calling this fat face. It's a very wider, dark font, and then it matches up really nicely with this smaller sans serif. Actually, yeah, it is a sans serif text, but it has more black to that. So the text is a little bit more bold than some of the other choices there, but it's a great resource to have in your design library. All right, so on to color now. So color is also a really important element in design. You really want to use color to attract attention. You can use it to organize content. You can emphasize elements, but you also can evoke emotion. You can create a physical response, a physiological response in your viewer and your learner. Color really helps the design look aesthetically pleasing when it's appropriately applied. And it also can increase comprehension. So there are colors that really, that will help students focus and get attention. And there's colors that will spark creativity or energy or imagination. So some of the common color schemes that you can use, one is monochromatic, which simply means the tints and shades of one color on the color wheel here. Complementary colors are colors opposite each other on the color wheel, and we talked about them a little bit before, but we can go in a little depth again. And then analogous colors. So those are colors next to each other on a color wheel, and that's actually most common in nature because our world is very analogous. You think about the trees, the greens that are out there, and then the yellows and the oranges and blues. And so we actually use analogous color schemes most commonly in design as well. And it is just a scheme that just provides comfort to people. We're used to it, and so we like seeing that, that type of design. All right, so color scheme examples here. So these are just some of the projects that I pulled from my classes at Quinnipiac. So we've got a monochromatic color scheme right over here. So we're using greens. And when I was designing this, I was really looking at that image. So the image is polychromatic. There's more than one color in there, but really looking to see what that color I could pull out of that image to help to create the hierarchy, to create that unification through that color scheme in this. Analogous color scheme, so a website that I set up. This was actually my capstone project. So I used analogous color scheme of orange, yellow, green, and blue. And notice that that orange yellow is very soft in color. It is not harsh. It's not vibrant. And again, we want to be careful with those vibrant colors next to each other. But this is just a very kind of soothing color scheme. And it has good visibility against that light background. And it just has a kind of a clean design for that. My St. Bernard poster was one of my favorite info posters, favorite project that I did. And so I used a complementary blue and orange color scheme in here, and browns are derived of oranges and yellows. So again, I did not use full saturations of the orange. I don't have the high contrast colors abutting each other because I want to make sure that everything stands out, everything is readable. So it is complementary colors will work as long as you don't, again, use full saturations of them. And it just makes it easier to view and to see the information. So there are a lot of color scheme websites that are out there. The meaning and use of colors. Colors do have personalities. So let me go to, get to the site. So I'm not sure if I can get into this site with this link. I apologize for that. Ask if I can write for my credentials, maybe. Okay, so let me see if I can approach it a little bit. Okay. There it is. Okay. So, like I said, colors have meanings. They're used very specifically in design, and they actually have personalities. So this site, this page in my site, it talks about the personality of colors, and red is used a lot. Red represents passion and love and anger and excitement. It's used a lot in business and design. It's considered one of the hungry colors that are out there. So when people see red, they tend to get hungry. You put somebody in a red room, red on the walls, red lights on them, they're going to go through some physiological changes. Their respiration is going to increase. They're going to get red in the face. They're going to get a little bit angry and agitated. So it's a very interesting color. And again, it's used most commonly. It's one of the most common colors that are used in design for that. If you're looking to spark creativity, orange is actually a very creative color. So you surround people by orange and they do become more energetic and more artistic and more creative. It's a room that I actually painted my design studio in. It's a soft color of orange, and I do feel creative when I'm in that space, when I'm painting or if I'm doing design work. So it is. It's also very much marketed to children. It's bold and vivacious, so it's a great color to use. Yellow is actually a nice calming color. So sometimes I'll use yellow in elementary schools to calm people or calm the children down for that. Yellow can also be considered a hungry color along with orange and red as well. So we see those colors a lot in food and fast food. Green is more of a nurturing color. It's also a color that a lot of banks use because it is it tends to be a trustworthy color. So you're going to see a lot of banks using this color. It's also considered with renewable and eco-friendly colors. So you do see that as well. Blue is, I like it, they say a color of dreamers and visionaries, your proactive and positive influence. Companies that use blue, they want to project a sense of security and loyalty and trust and authority. We have a power blue suit, so politicians almost never will appear in a brown suit, but they're going to appear in a blue suit because we're going to trust them more. And they actually rate people in different color clothing, and brown tends to be one of the dishonest color clothing. People will see people and rate people that are in brown clothing as more dishonest than their counterparts. And it could even be the same person in a different color suit like blue, and it's very interesting, the results of the studies for that. So violet tends to be impulsive, reactive and emotional, but it's also not, it's less common in design. Some, like Hallmark and Cadbury, we have these colors. Cadbury makes a really good choice for purple because if you go down that candy aisle, not very many wrappers or companies use purple at all, so they really stand out from all of the oranges and the reds and the yellows for the candy. But be very thoughtful when you're choosing your colors. If you might be your favorite color, but may not be a color that is going to work in your designs as effectively, but they do have their personalities. So when you are choosing your colors, there are a lot of sites out there that will actually help you to create those color schemes that we talked about. So I introduced complementary, the monochromatic, and analogous color. And so there is Adobe created a color site, and this is really nice because if you're working in Photoshop, if you're working in InDesign, and you have a color that you like, you can come in here and say, okay, I want to do an analogous color scheme and I want to base it on blues. And so it's going to give you the color palettes here, but it's also going to provide the color number information down below. So you can, if you really like this color blue and the way it looks like on your screen and you're creating documents for a webinar or for an online presentation, you can actually write down your color numbers down here, your RGB color numbers. You can go into Photoshop, into InDesign, into Word, and you can actually put in the color numbers, and then you're going to have that consistent color. It's not going to be a surprise when you open up your document or somebody else opens the document. It'll actually be very consistent to what you intended it to be. When we teach our students in graphic design, we actually have to teach them color by number, not color by visual, because in graphic design, we're typically creating things on computers that are going to be printed. And so if we just choose our colors by our eyes on screen, we're usually surprised by what colors actually print out, because we're using red, green, and blue on screen to create colors, but in the printing process, we're using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So the students have to really look at colors and learn colors by their numbers and really understand that the color number is what is most important, and that way there's not going to be any surprises when they go to print out. So even if it looks one way on the monitor, it's going to print out the correct way, what they want it to do. You might end up working with Pantone colors. That's another way to make sure that your colors are consistent through web colors and also printed colors as well. But again, this color site is very, very effective in helping you to choose the colors. If you're in a color rut, it really will help you make some changes to your colors. And this is playing with the levels and the saturations of the colors as well. And so you've got a lot of options when you're using the color wheel here, this color site. So let me go to the next one. So again, Canva. So what's really nice about Canva is that you can upload some images. They have come up with their demo image. You can upload some images and it will actually look at the image and it's going to generate some color schemes based on that image. So it's a great way to actually create unity through your pieces. And so, it's pulling up in this picture, this really nice foggy type of background. So we've got that gray that's going to match. And then it's pulling out the tones of the jacket and, really giving a nice effective color scheme that's going to be unified with that image. So you can bring up, again, any image that you want to use in your documentation, bring it into Canva, and then let Canva create those color schemes for you. So very effective design tool. And then Coolers is actually another great site. So this is really helpful when you're creating documentation and you're actually, it'll create color schemes for you, which is great, but it also will go ahead and show you what your colors will look like to people that are colorblind or have varying degrees of color blindness. So this is really important. It's one of the things that we do need to take into consideration when we're creating our designs for instructional design, to make sure that we are looking at colors and how they're viewed with somebody with color blindness. So I just asked it to generate a color scheme. So here are the colors that it generated for me. Pretty vibrant. I'd be very careful about using some of these colors side by side because I would get some of that vibrating edges. But this little eye icon, if you click on it, you actually have a lot of different types of color blindness. This first one is actually people who have difficulty with red and green. They can see a little more green than they can see red. So that is what it would look like to somebody who has red-green color blindness. So you can see a huge difference of colors here to that person. So when you are designing, one of the things that you can think about is the color contrast. There is still a lot of color contrast in between these, or value contrast. So if you are designing with that first color scheme, it's not going to be too bad. So if you use this color text over this color background, the text is still going to be readable because there's enough contrast. But this is really fascinating to go through these colors And if you are working closely with somebody that you know is colorblind, this really is an effective tool to help you to create these documents and use the colors that will be very helpful to them. So for instance, this one, these two reds are so close together that you would not want to, the person would have trouble differentiating the different sections, the different colors right over here. So Cooler, again, is a great website for that. And there's a lot of other things that they'll do as well for that, for you, in choosing your colors. These tabs here. And these are the resources. And again, I'm going to share this PDF document with Kristen so you can actually have access to all of these resources. These links will be live, so you can go ahead and check out some of these sites. And if you have any questions at all, I guess I'll take questions now.
Yay, thank you, Joanne. That was awesome. I think it was really great too that you tied in so many of, you know, the projects that we do in this program and how these types of principles could help with those projects. There was one question that came up during the presentation in the chat, so I can read that to you. Okay. Matt asked, what typography do you recommend when using colored backgrounds? Would you use serif or non-serif?
That's really going to depend on the font choice that you use, because it's going to be the contrast, the color contrast for that. You know, a lot of people, if we're looking at this type right here, we see people who try to design with white text on a black background, and the point size is small, like 8 or 10 or even 12 point. And that really creates some visibility issues for that. So it's really going to be more of the typefaces that you use with the colors and the color combinations. So does Matt want to expound on his question at all? I want to make sure that I'm kind of...
Maybe an additional part of that question is, would you recommend tweaking the spacing between the letters as well?
Yes, if you have the patience and the time, yes, you certainly can do that. That's something, I use Canva actually to set up this presentation. So Canva actually did some of the tweaking, the kerning and the tracking is what you're talking about. So yes, there's some really heavy fonts that if you type them out, their edges might be too close together. So you certainly can affect the kerning or the tracking of the font. So tracking would be to select the whole word and then increase the spacing in between the letters, like this is done. Some types of fonts actually have letter combinations that either they appear too close together or they appear too far apart from each other. And so you really want to, sometimes you can go in there and you can just tweak and you just turn in between those two letters and tighten up that space so it doesn't look like an actual break in the word. But that's really kind of nuanced with the typography. But if it's something that you notice, your learner is probably going to notice it too. So if it's causing you some angst when you're looking at it, that something doesn't look right, it's worthwhile to actually kern or track that to get it to read better.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple other questions from the chat. One from Susan. Is there a maximum number of colors that one should not exceed in a project?
Triad are 3, tetrads are 4. The more colors that you do introduce, the more overwhelming it is going to be for your learner. And again, colors can be really stimulating. So if you've got younger learners, you're going to want to limit your palette. You know, we think sometimes, oh, we're going to use all bright colors, and sometimes that's just is too much for that. So if I'm working with my design students, we don't go beyond a tetrad, which is 4 colors. And if we are in a tetrad, we don't add a whole bunch of values, tints or shades of the colors, you know, adding white or adding black to the colors. So you still want to limit it. Just like too many fonts, you still want to limit your colors as well. You don't want to cause too many focal points, too much visual confusion with the piece with the colors.
Thank you. That's good. That's good for me because I never know sort of when to stop myself.
Yeah, if you notice that, then, you know, certainly if you're noticing how many colors that you have, then your viewers and your learners are going to notice that too. So sometimes, and I tend to be more simplistic in my design, so I actually tend to do more muted palettes and more limited colors. I like kind of the challenge sometimes sometimes if I'm even doing graphic design, working with a client that can only pay for one color. So, how can you make something visually interesting, visually striking, only using the shades and tints of one color? So you can do it. And sometimes it's more of a design challenge, but for me, it also creates more of a cleaner, sometimes more professional appearance as well.
Let's see, the next two questions are both about accessibility, so I will kind of lump them together for you. The first is about colors. So what are the most common colors that work in compliance with ADA, specifically for like an online course? And then the second one was in typography, what fonts are best for, addressing accessibility issues?
Okay, so for colors first, if you don't know if you don't know if your learners have any, color blindness or accessibility issues with color, you probably want to stay away from your reds and your greens. That's the most common color issues that people have are red and greens. Sometimes people always think it's just men that actually are colorblind, but women do have some color blindness as well. After red and green, there tends to be some blues, some low-level blues that people also have some difficulty seeing. But really, it's the red and the greens that cause the most trouble for people that have colorblind issues. And then for fonts, I think it's more of just making sure that you're not using overly decorative fonts for people that might have some visibility or issues. So again, I tend to use more cleaner fonts, what I call cleaner fonts, more simple fonts instead of the decorative fonts. If I'm going to use a decorative font, it's really going to be to create that focal point or that point of interest in the design, but it's not going to be replicated throughout the design. It may be just, a hit in a couple different places, and that's about it. So just more readability. If you're creating things again for children, you're going to want to use more serif fonts because the serifs just lend itself again to recognizing word clusters, which letters go together to create the words, which words go together. But if you're creating things again for online, you're going to want to stay away from your serifs and you're going to want to have your more simple fonts. It's going to be really interesting to see as we get more used to reading online, using electronic readers, using iPads, if serif fonts don't start creeping into our printed materials as well. So for this piece, I chose to go into serif fonts, even though I know it was going to be printed at some point too. But I think we're probably going to start seeing that, that since more and more people are going to be reading and using online materials, they're going to get used to that sans serif font. And I have a feeling we're going to start seeing the rule change a little bit where sans serif font might start taking over in the printed realm of typography as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even in Microsoft Word, I feel like the default fonts are now sans serif fonts.
They are. They are really coming up. You look at the templates, and they're coming up with those sans serif fonts, definitely. And I think that's just we're just getting so used to it. I think it's just going to continue that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Does anyone else have a question that you want to either type in the chat or you can take the mic and speak up? Otherwise, I have one more question, but I want to give the students a chance. I don't see anyone coming off.
Okay.
Coming off mic. My kind of last question, or anyone else, you're welcome to jump into. I get a lot of questions from students who are sort of overwhelmed when they just have a blank slate, like they have a, they're going to start an infographic or a poster, they just have a blank page. Do you have any more general sort of guidelines that you tell your students to, like how to get started? Like, should they divide their page up into spaces, or should they pick colors first, or what? Do you have any sort of tips to get people started when they're working on a visual design?
What we do with what I do with my students a lot of times is they develop what's called a swipe file. You can use Pinterest, you can use different things that you see that spark your creativity, spark your imagination, or you like a layout, or you like a color palette. So you start collecting these types of documents or these images. So if you're kind of faced with that blank paper, if I'm faced with something like that, I'll actually go through and look at things that I liked and, remember why I liked it. So we do call them swipe files, but they really can spark some creativity, spark some interest. Think about, if you're trying for that design, think about what you're trying to convey and images, using images to get attention, that creating those focal points. I like using some images so that, that's why I incorporated the dog photographs in there as well. So, something that will, spark your imagination. If I watched the social media presentation, and she did a great job of talking about the grid structure. So that's a great way to start as well. So if we talked about balance tonight, the grid structure would play into that, but I thought, she did a really good job on that, so I didn't delve into that. But, folding up the paper, dividing it up into grid sections, and what do you want to present first, second, and third, and then figuring out how to lay it out into following the grid. That might help you as well. Canva is a great start for design. So I think I'm actually showing my students how to use Canva, my senior students, so they learn how to use all the design programs. But realistically, when they go into their jobs or in their internships, they may not have the opportunity to start from scratch with their own ideas every single time. So I have been showing them how to use Canva, incorporating that to one of my classes. And for the first couple of weeks, they tell me it feels like cheating because they're using these templates. But you can bring in your own photographs. You can choose different colors. You can bring in your own own images and illustrations if you want to. So I'm showing them how to start with these templates and then making it more of their own too. But I think Canva is going to be a really good choice for people if you're new to design and you're worried about how to cleanly present your information. They are a great resource for students to use and instructional designers to use. And it's kind of like Wix. When I see websites now, I can recognize which websites are Wix websites, and you can start recognizing the Canva templates too. But that's a really good starting place too to get some creativity. And you're not stuck in their templates. You can start changing things around, but it really does provide you sometimes with that starting point. If you need help trying to figure out where to go and how to be creative, it's a great resource.
That's a great tip, because I think that for the instructional design students, you come from a graphic design background, so you have all those skills, but it's obviously not something that everyone comes in with, and it's hard to fit that into the program because there are so many other things that we're trying to teach. So having something that is sort of a cheat for you, to start off on the right foot, and then for students who, really fall in love with doing that kind of work, then they can seek out more information on, these really the core principles of graphic design and how to do it from scratch on their own. So that's helpful. Thank you.
And that's why I included the website links too. So like I said, I'll get the PDF of this to you, so students can go and start using these sites and kind of building up their design arsenal, if you will, of so they can just start going out and designing and feeling confident. The Font Pair is a great site, and they match up those fonts. So if you're new to typography, it's such a good resource. And you see right away, you can type your own text into it, like I said, and you see right away whether it's going to be effective or whether it's going to suit your purposes. So having these resources, building up, that swipe board or that interest board, that's really going to help you to visualize how you can present your instructional design. Writing the content, we learn how to write the content, but sometimes it's just as important as how to display that content, so it becomes usable to the learner.
Uh-oh, I hope you don't hear those dogs barking.
I do, that's okay.
I know, you had the dog theme in your project.
And I'm doing my presentation through school because I don't want my St. Bernards barking in the back at home.
Well, thank you so much. I think, unless anyone else pipes in, I think that was wonderful. Like I say, really gave us some good principles, but also some real usable things that we can just turn around and use tomorrow in class. So that's fantastic. And I will make sure that this gets distributed out to the students, and I will post up the recording too. So obviously feel free to share it with anybody, and the students who weren't able to make it here, we'll share it with them as well. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Joanne. It was really awesome.
Thank you very much. And I really I appreciate my time at Quinnipiac. And for those of you who are going through the program, it is a really wonderful program. I'm so grateful that I went through it, and so grateful that I had a professor like Kristen and Ruth as well for this. It's been a tremendous asset to my career.
Oh, thank you, Joanne. You were an easy student to teach, so we loved having you. So we'll stay in touch. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. It was a super long week for me, so I assume it was super long for everybody. And thank you again, Joanne, for being here and presenting.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.